It's a big math and software problem, and so it's even more complicated.
You're manipulating massive, massive matrices that cannot possibly fit in any chip. So you need to figure out how to slice and dice the matrices and do local compute given your hardware and your memory hierarchy in order to maximize the compute.
Right.
It's a very hard math problem that they're solving every time they have to port to a new GPU.
Yeah, and it's different. If we have CIOs in a room, when we thought about big data, we used to shard across Hadoop environments and things like that. You can't really shard matrices. It's very, very different than that. And so it's not as simple of a problem as simply splitting up it's a whole mathematical process to break up your matrices and be able to put them back together.
Exactly.
And so you need math to do it. It's kind of like when we used to explain deep learning using deep learning. It's the same kind of thing. And so as we think about where we're going, and we're kind of getting to this a little bit, what are the future trends that you're seeing as you're out there? Kind of talking about, talking with your customers and the hyperscalers and the frontier model, like developers like OpenAI and Anthropic and those all.
So where are we going? Right now, a lot of people are enamored with the big LLMs, but what we need to realize is that those big LLMs only learn from text, so they're very bookish. But you can't possibly have, let's say, a robot that looks like you and I with just 2 cameras, put it in a car and teach it how to drive with just an LLM as an artificial brain, right? That won't work because it knows everything that's written in books, but it doesn't understand the laws of physics.
Which gets back to it not being smart, right?
Exactly. They cannot learn certain things because they don't fully comprehend the laws of physics, because they haven't seen it. And I think where we're going is models that will learn not just from text, but also from observing. That's how,
And that's beyond what we talk about as multimodal. Multimodal, we talk about text, image, video. So this is going beyond multimodal.
Yeah, it is kind of multimodal, but really learning from video, there are a few models that do it, maybe like Sora, but it's not available yet. But it's not quite a solved problem yet.
And it doesn't necessarily understand physics, right? To your point about understanding physics, it can't necessarily understand physics from video.
So it learns from videos just like they learn the English grammar and vocabulary just by reading books. They never studied the grammar, they never studied the dictionary, they're just reading books, and now they know English, just like when we were kids, right? We learned by hearing and talking back. It's the same for video. If a baby sees me throw a ball or a glass and then it breaks, the baby learns the laws of physics. It doesn't understand the Newton equations, but it knows what's going to. Now it can predict what's going to happen. And that's the same with models. By looking at videos, they learn trajectories, they learn action and reaction without literally teaching them the equation. They just see it and they learn. That's how we learned, right? That's how we learned. Yeah. We understood Newton before we went to school. And I think that's where we're going. Models that we learn from videos, from audio, from one day from touch and smell. Smell is just analyzing the molecules that are in the air. All that will happen. It's going to take a while. It's not going to be like next year, but maybe 5, 10 years. But that's where we're going. And those models will actually be massive because video data is not going to be cheap. So that's why it's really imperative that we make exponential progress in terms of compute per watt and shrinking the compute in geometries that are workable.
And I think there's 2 parts to this, right? The current language models, the architecture is not the way they're building those on what's called a transformer architecture. That's not really what it was designed for, right? And that's why you have the problems with hallucinations and things like that. And so I think you'll see over the next few years moving back to smaller models, industry-specific, task-specific, and we're already seeing that, which will get to the on-device things more effectively.
Absolutely.
And then I think you'll see a lot of this compute moving to some of the larger models moving towards some of these other.
You can fix problems like hallucination by augmenting a small model with proprietary data, so you can build what they call a RAG pipeline, retrieval.
But that doesn't actually fix it. That minimizes it.
It minimizes it a lot.
If anyone tells you they fixed it, they don't know what they're talking about.
It minimizes it by an awful lot.
Yeah, it minimizes it. Gets down to, and there's some good papers out there and tests by Galileo and on Hugging Face where they kind of give you metrics.
That's right.
The best I've seen is it reduces it down to 89%. Which is still pretty significant. And so I guess any closing thoughts on kind of where we're going or what we're doing as we're moving forward in terms of AI, software-defined hardware, any of the topics or others that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, look, I think people want choice. There is an availability problem. There is a closeness problem. People want choice and they want openness. And I think a lot of players, not just AMD, but Intel, who's next, are really pushing towards that, towards openness, open source, and diversity of hardware. And it's happening in the cloud, it's happening at the edge, in the endpoint, and I think it's a really exciting moment. And the few examples I gave of AI, you can see that AI is also used for the good of humanity. So there's a lot of people scared of AI, just like any big technological progress scares a lot of people, but I'm very optimistic. AI, I think, is going to be very good for humanity and for our productivity in general. And let's push toward openness and diversity of hardware and software.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ramin, for this engaging conversation and chat. And I have to say, it was good to learn about the workload on the endpoints and how it can be distributed. That was a good one. And then I also learned SOC stands Beyond Then Security Operations Center, as the cybersecurity nerds would say. Anyhow, moving into our next session, which is an executive interview on AI everywhere, how AI is scaling from cloud to edge. And for that, I'll invite on the stage Intel's VP and General Manager, Network and Edge Software, Munib Minizuddin. Please.
Hey, Munib. All right. Thank you for joining us, Munib. Very nice to finally meet you. We've only met over the phone, so nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to meet you in person, and welcome. And so, we're going to continue the conversation about hardware platforms and software-defined hardware, and I think you have a very similar role to Ramin in Intel. So I think this will be a great conversation to continue there as we talk about scaling to edge, and we kind of touched on that on the last conversation. So I think it's a great segue. And we talk about kind of this conversation about AI running on the edge, and we talk about beyond clouds and data centers and getting to other areas. And we talk about PCs and operational environments. What trends are you seeing in this area? How are you seeing kind of this movement out of data centers to the edge, onto the PCs and things like that?
Yeah, no, great question. I've been kind of a workload chaser all my life, right? So I'm kind of relatively probably a couple of years into Intel. I was a decade at VMware. I kind of heard you use software-defined. I remember coining that term with software-defined data center at VMware and driving that. But I would say workloads are moving, right? So workloads, as you know, we're very much in the data center. Started moving towards the cloud. The architectures changed from client-server architecture to more cloud-native architectures. Now workloads are moving towards the edge. And what does that mean? As workloads distribute themselves, data distributes itself. And largely AI is mining the data for analytics and information. So it's a cause and effect is basically as workloads distribute. And we saw that acceleration of that distribution happen towards COVID, right? Everybody started working from home. Workloads started moving towards the edge. So as workloads expand, we see that data is also expanding. And with that comes data gravity issues, data privacy issues, data thinning issues. You have too much data. How do you thin the data in an intelligent way? And the life of CIOs and enterprises gets even worse. When it was in a data center, lock and key, it's safe. Moves into the cloud. Oh my God, it's in multiple clouds. How do I do cloud security? How do I manage my my attack surface? And now it goes to the edge. It's even worse. You have to start thinking about zero trust kind of frameworks. So kind of bringing that back, every time there's complexity that increases in one spectrum, then security, manageability, operationalization becomes hard. And AI comes in to kind of challenge all of that, to kind of say, how would you secure, how would you do this in a manageable way? Because I know the excitement with AI is everywhere. Is everybody's like, I have a new tool set. It's almost like early days of computing. I can automate everything. I can get AI helping me automate tasks. But then the complexity comes, how are you going to do it ethically? How are you going to do it securely? How are you going to do it responsibly? And then the nightmare is, how do you actually operationalize this?
Right.
How do you, because it wasn't easy to operationalize the client-server architecture. It was even harder to do it with clouds and multi-cloud. And how is it worse in the edge? But then how do you secure this end-to-end? So then you talk about that movement of AI to the edge. It's following the trend of workloads moving towards the edge. Processing moving to the edge, digitization of the edge. There's a lot of kind of things that come together.
Right, and it's more than just when we think about going back, depending on when or if you move to the cloud, and certainly a multi-cloud, right? And it's more than just securing yet another environment, because I think, a lot of CIOs and CISOs, I remember when I was at Monsanto when we moved to the cloud, our CISO was initially, oh my gosh, you can't do that, don't put any proprietary data up there because it's a security issue. And then we moved it and had zero trust, and he was like, when can you move everything to the cloud because you get rid of all my technical debt? Yeah. And then we started moving to multiple clouds, and he was kind of scared again, and then he said, okay, how do we do this with everything? And so I think we'll see a similar movement with Edge, because it's a way to re-architect everything and get rid of some technical debt and some, not necessarily mistakes, but some new way to implement some new ways of doing things that have been built for this new world. And so
It is, and it's, that digitization of the edge has been going on, right? So different terms of IoT or things like that, where machines and things started getting connected, and they were generating data. Again, coming back to what do I do with that data?
Right.
Is all of that data relevant for me? Do I need to kind of pipe all that data up to a cloud to build my powerful LLMs and machines, or do I thin the data and just take the metadata and then use that, right? So I think there's a lot of kind of permutation combinations in this, but it's largely workloads. Where are my workloads? What data do they generate? How do I manage that workload, my data, and therefore analyze that data using the smartest tools available to me?
Right.
And AI kind of brings in, over the last 12 to 18 months, tool chains, because I know it's like, it's a, I heard SOC, I had, it's like almost, there's a lot of buzzwords going on. It's just basically like, hey, give me an outcome.
Yeah.
Right? How do businesses deal with outcomes?
Right.
Because they want to show value they want to stay competitive against their own environments, be it whatever vertical, and they want to drive some outcomes and operational efficiencies and keep the business running.
Absolutely. I mean, you shouldn't have an AI strategy. You should have a business strategy, and AI is part of it, right? It gets back to mobile. 10, 15 years ago, everyone was looking for a mobile strategy. Yeah. No one has a mobile strategy anymore. It's part of their business strategy. It should be the same thing with AI, right? And so, in fact, I think you worked with IDC and developed looked at some case studies, and they kind of evaluated the landscape on just these last couple topics. What did they find?
Yeah, it was interesting. We did primary research because it was hard to kind of look at folks who've kind of done this, both the scaling distribution of workloads to the edge, and then the automation and the AI aspects of it. So we had to do some primary research. We actually have our products. We have dozens of production deployments happening, but that was not enough. So we did both qualitative and quantitative research with IDC to identify what were the primary issues CIOs and enterprises were dealing with. And I was kind of listing security, operationalization. How do I we think it's exciting stuff. It's actually the boring stuff, right? So how do I, zero trust secure every device at me at the edge? There was a lot of refactoring of applications going on, because people thought, just like you were in the data center and try to move applications to the cloud, you had to replatform, refactor, rewrite your applications. As they're moving towards the edge, they're rewriting, refactoring, applications to the edge. Now they're adding, AI modules as sidecars to their containers and deploying them. So there's a second level of complexity as they distribute these applications. And those are the challenges, operational challenges, cost challenges, security challenges, data privacy challenges that were that we discovered through this qualitative, quantitative research with IDC.
And it's actually a multi-dimensional level of complexity because software is static and finite because you deploy it and it doesn't change unless you change it, whereas machine learning changes on its own, right, by definition. And so not only adding this level of complexity, but it's neither finite nor static because it continues to grow, it continues to change because that's the nature of it.
And that's some of the use cases we're seeing too, by the way, right? So I think I had Ramin kind of talk about earlier, hey, Edge, and we're seeing, all types of robotic arms, PLCs. Some of my early deployments are in examples.
For those that aren't in manufacturing, what's a PLC?
The programmable logical controllers.
Yeah, so
these are the things that arms like, hey, move this arm by this 30 degrees, 40 degrees, pick this up, deploy this. So we're seeing like one of my deployments is in windmills. You think windmills? Well, apparently they're very expensive to roll out. The CapEx is super high, but they're not that productive. So they've been modeling using, watching the windmill performance for 12 months with massive LLMs in the cloud, watching all images and still not getting 30% productivity increase. So we're able to then go in and say, well, AI at the edge, can I ingest time series data coming out of the generators and inverters in the windmills and measure, the wind direction, the moisture content, so multi-sensor data, pull that all together, just ingest it, no greenfield deployment, no massive GPUs, just on standard CPUs, IoT devices, use inferencing models there, and within 3 weeks, we're able to get them the 30% productivity. It was not because we had the smartest model, not because we had the most efficient, what you called out agility. What was highly unpredictable about the windmills was the weather conditions were constantly changing. So what you needed was a small, learning, relearning, adaptive model, which was tracking all the conditions, and then the in-band closed-loop control. So based on that outcome, we're saying move the windmill 20 degrees this way, 30 degrees this way in order to get your 30% KPI output. So having a live closed loop, data ingestion, processing and modeling, and then driving that within 3 weeks, we're able to get them 30% productivity. Now that's been in production for 6 months, maintaining that level of productivity. And this comes to the agility at the edge where you have to be, keeping up with changing conditions.
Right, so getting back to business value, so the business value to them, and they can quantify the value of that, so down to the dollar probably.
Oh, geez, absolutely.
Yeah.
So every one of my production deployments is driving real ROI TCO.
Right.
Right, so the other one is a warehouse where pallet detection, it's a massive, I think we've publicly walked them on stage, this is IKEA. IKEA, imagine the amount of operations in warehouses that's going on. So when they receive in the loading dock, faulty pallets, and they actually receive the pallets, they have to underwrite insurance. That's hundreds of millions of dollars of underwriting of insurance that happens. But what if, as the truck arrives, we can actually sense and say that, more than 40% of the pallets are damaged, they don't do receivable goods and turn the shipment around, which is what we're doing for them. And it's just the time it takes is the truck rolls in, immediately we give the inference, it turns around, and they don't receivables, it just sends it back. That's saving hundreds of millions of dollars of insurance underwriting, right? So this is happening at scale deployments.
Yeah, are there any other customer stories that you can think of that are relevant from IDC or?
Yeah, we actually had IDC interview a lot of these folks across most verticals. Oil refineries, pipelines, very remote oil and gas, manufacturing, retail, healthcare. I think we talked about healthcare with kids' data. Actually, this is kind of more related to federated learning.
Right.
Because what you can do now is you can process data at the source. So we published this with SAP. This is SAP HANA instances where you had electronic medical records related to cancer research happening in 70 plus institutions. Now you could never bring that centrally and put it anywhere because of HIPAA and data privacy governance. So we're able to put our edge solution, provide retraining, inferencing right on that data at the edge.
Right.
But then leave the data behind, pull the model. So each of the institution had less than, million records, 100,000, 200,000 records. But then across 70 plus institutions, that's about 50 million records.
Right, and you're only pulling the parameters from the model, so you're
Absolutely.
not taking anything proprietary, you're just pulling the factors of the model that are retrained
Absolutely.
and combining them.
And then supplying that model then to pathologists, oncologists. So we were able to, walk on stage in SAP conference and talk about with Quest Diagnostics that oncologists are now suddenly, when they look through the microscope, those cancer, tissues,
Right.
Immediately AI is assisting them. There's a lot of assisting happening to say now that's pinpointing exactly where that issue is, because the current process for the oncologist is, somewhere between 4 to 6 months. Now this happens in 2 to 3 weeks.
Right.
Saving, cancer patient lives, it's pretty fast.
Yeah.
Because we called it precision medicine, because you're able to precisely AI with 50 million records, which are very disaggregated, now just pull the parameters, federate that learning, and then supply that to where it's valuable.
Yeah, and this has tremendous ramifications, all that you just talked about, well beyond that, and some of what I hit on with Ramin, when you talk about things like data sovereignty and data privacy. If you're a multinational company and you do business across some of these areas where there's data sovereignty issues, you can now have the same model or some version of the same model running globally, but get the value from all of these different global locations without having to worry about violating these data sovereignty laws, or we have special agreements with these places where you can pull all these parameters together, have applied different weights to them, and then redeploy the new model back out, right? I mean, so this adds a tremendous amount of value beyond that, and getting into things like data privacy, or even getting into the new EU AI Act that was just launched, because that solves some of those issues as well.
Absolutely.
So I think there's some great opportunity around federated learning. It's something lots of people have been trying to solve for a long time, and we're just starting to see it, create value.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of this will again come down to how do you operationalize it? Because it's quite exciting to take a lot of this, publish papers on this. But reality is, when you actually put it out in an enterprise and you have to scale to, 15 data centers, 100,000 employees, 20 this locations, 30,000 edge locations, how do you operationalize it? Day 0, day 1, day 2, maintain it, and then, you kind of deploy it, then you orchestrate it, observe it, monitor for, drift, how do you fix it? Some of the boring stuff, this is because that's when I believe this will scale.
Right.
And if you don't operationalize this, it'll be a whole bunch of science experiments.
And you said a key word that I always, kind of harp on. It goes beyond what people talk about as ML ops and gets into observability, because you need to watch the whole pipeline and not just the things that people talk about with ML ops. So you need to kind of observe everything in concert, which is a really important piece. And so as we think about that and we move into the topic du jour of every conference or conversation, Gen AI, right? How do we think about Gen AI and edge, and what are the challenges? And I mean, some of these are massive models like we talked about before. How do you think about that and the edge? Oh, no,
I think edge is distribution, right? So the reason we went down the path of federated and et cetera is you wouldn't be able to solve like large language models at the edge on one little, processor. So it's from a software perspective, this is where the value comes in. As you abstract from silicon hardware, the software abstraction layer should be able to manage CPU, NPU, GPU, DPU, all kinds of processing units, and then do the distribution of these workloads. So I see that federation, that distribution. It's going to be small language models. Right. I think to Ramin's earlier point with AMD doing 50 TOPS on little processors at the edge, we're doing 70 TOPS on our core.
And in fact, these small models on specific tasks outperform on the big models on those specific tasks.
Absolutely. Because what you can do at the edge specifically is the outcome is very specific. The windmill example, I know exactly what I'm looking for. So you can actually cut down the number of parameters because you're not solving world hunger.
Right.
You're not boiling the ocean. There's very specific triggers. There's very specific outcomes. You can train them to those parameters and maintain that. So you don't need the big engine at all.
And that's in fact what these models were designed for initially, right? These
Absolutely.
Foundation models, as they're called, that's initially what they were designed for. They weren't designed for these massive...
Absolutely. So we're taking those pre-trained models. We're then applying, capabilities like local data annotation, RAG, what have you, to supplement them and retrain them where possible, right? So, the whole solution software we have is called Intel Tiber Edge Platform. But then components of that have data annotation, which we call like Getty, which allows people to, I can give you a coffee bean farmer example in Brazil. Who's quite excited to kind of come onto our website and say, look what I did. I was able to take 50 images on my phone and then annotate on it for 20 minutes and create a model. No data scientist, I'm just a farmer.
Right.
Right? But I'm able to annotate to say, this is a good coffee bean, this is a bad coffee bean. And that crude model that comes up, then he can then share with 200 coffee bean pickers who are not experts. That 50 images with 20 minutes of expert data annotation and training got the same outcome of 2 million images in the cloud. And he didn't have the wherewithal to take up 2 million images and upload it. He doesn't have a data scientist at his disposal.
He doesn't have 2 million images.
He doesn't. And then he doesn't have a data scientist to actually do all of this. So how do you enable line of business users to just use basic simple tool sets and get started and then operationalize and distribute it across 200 users was tremendous for him.
Yeah, and like I was talking about with Ramin, with the startups looking at abstraction layers, there's tons of startups looking at how do you build small models, how do you actually bring a bunch of small models together to solve specific problems, to build communities of models that many of them can run on the edge because some of these models are so small because the tasks are so specific that they're like megabyte size small models. And so those are things that you could run on.
That's probably the evolution. I know we talk about models, but I'll almost say 12, 18 months ago, most of them were vision-oriented. What I've seen in the last few quarters is time series data, all types of...
And time series is a language, right? Time series, you think of it as, people don't necessarily know this, but it's a language, right? It can be viewed as a language, and language models can be trained on them.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing, even with our software, which is open source, similarly, we've been contributing to a project called OpenVino on GitHub, and for the last 3-4 years, very vision-oriented. But I would say almost a year ago, we started the shift towards time series data and time series-based models. But we saw an inflection point of the number of users getting on and using that. So we're 95% in the first half of last year of vision-based models. Second half, that was more 50% vision, 50% time series. Coming into this year, the first half, it's 90% time series data, right?
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
It's fascinating, but I think the future is exciting where we can solve a lot of problems, but also kind of hard for enterprises and CIOs as to how do you actually roll this out and maintain it and secure it. And, cybersecurity was an issue as you rolled out data. Now AI ethics and AI responsibility and AI-based, security is, I'm sure you'll get new buzzwords like, we had, DevSecOps.
Right.
I don't know, DevSec AI ops, right? So it's all kinds of operationalization issues that are out there for us to address.
And in fact, when I was at IBM, we moved AI ethics into our CISO, into our SecOps, and so that's the logical place to do it, to your point.
Absolutely.
And so I think, you kind of got into the future, where you see as a future, and we're out of time.
Perfect.
Very much appreciate you and your time here and your insights. Thank you for the conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Moneb, Seth, and Ramin for such a wonderful 2 engaging sessions. By the way, if anybody has any questions, please log into the Reuters app and submit as a part of the Q&A. And also the last session was presented in collaboration with Intel. I think some of the things around the workloads moving from on-prem to the cloud to the edge. And then also, one thing that really stood out for me in the last conversation was the convergence of human intelligence with artificial intelligence. The example being, you don't need 2 million images. You need real expertise, real data to really transform some of the models. That's wonderful. With that said, we're going to move to our next session, which is an executive interview on the topic of accelerating AI innovation from strategy to scale. And for that, I'm going to invite on the stage Dell's Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy, Vivek Mohindra, in conversation with Edelman Smithfield, EVP and Head of AI Strategy, Chris Donahoe. Please. And this interview is in partnership with Dell. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Vivek, I'm really excited for this conversation. I tried to read your doctoral thesis on the flight, but it was way over my head. I think you're a real man for this moment. Can you give us just a quick glimpse into your background and kind of the diversity of thinking that brought you to how you're approaching this problem today?
Yeah, Chris, thank you. I'm excited to be here and see many familiar faces, so thank you. Yeah, my journey is an interesting one. You know, as you mentioned, I got my PhD in chemical engineering, and by the way, I did use neural networks to make sense out of my data. So what is old is new again, I think, as I say. Spent 10 years in consulting at McKinsey, and then came to Dell for the first time, left and became an investor at TPG Capital in a venture capital firm, and returned back to Dell 4 years ago to bring all of the cumulative experience, including my serving on 10 different boards, to this role, which I took on a year ago. And you're exactly right. I think we are at this really exciting moment. So I'm tremendously excited about its opportunities that it presents for all of us.
I want to talk a minute about Dell. I know growing up, Dell was kind of the prominent brand for me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my mom, figuring out what components we would put in the new desktop build. But Dell has been on a long AI journey as well. Can you walk us through that journey, both in terms of how your customer and client offerings have developed and how you have kind of adapted as the technology has improved over the years?
Yeah, Chris, so we've been playing with AI for a long time. A lot of our products have had several traditional AI elements in them for a while. With the advent of Gen AI and the opportunity that it presents for itself, we kind of went back and thought about how it applies to us, and we think about ourselves as customer zero. And we came up with a simple strategic framework. We think about AI in 4 different categories: AI in our products, AI for ourselves, how do we apply it to ourselves, and then AI on and AI with. So what do our customers do with AI on our products? So we think about it in those 4 simple ways. As far as AI for is concerned, which is applying it to ourselves, we kind of went back and thought about it at a very fundamental level and a very different level to think about what does AI enable. And we went back and anchored ourselves to our AI strategy has to be reflection and accentuation of our business strategy. And that's the first and foremost principle we anchored to. And we are rethinking how we use it for ourselves quite dramatically. I'll touch upon that, but by and large, when you go back and look at our business strategy, it is anchored to our unique operating model, which is driven by an end-to-end portfolio covering services, servers, storage, networking, data protection, software, and PCs, the broadest portfolio in the world, largest go-to-market engine in the industry with tens of thousands of direct sellers and 250,000 partners, services capabilities globally across 180 countries with 2,200 service centers, and then our supply chain, where we buy a tremendous amount of parts all over the world. Our AI strategy is anchored towards accentuating that and helping our customers win. And that's where the AI on and the AI with, when we think about ourselves as customer zero, it gives us a unique ability to go and tell our customers precisely what to do because we embarked on this journey pretty early.
Do you think that, I love that concept of customer zero, of applying what you're recommending to yourself first and learning from that. You know, we're talking about how to accelerate this innovation cycle. I mean, literally how to build momentum as companies adapt and evolve. How valuable do you think that customer zero mindset has been for you in kind of generating the momentum of that innovation flywheel?
Tremendously valuable. And this is not a new principle either, because we have always thought about ourselves as customer zero. We're a scale company with over 100,000 people. And really, it's really all of that thinking that drove us to be one of the first in the industries to define a chief AI officer role, which we still have. We thought about using Gen AI very differently to drive a lot of the innovation for ourselves. We thought about the architecture platform we need to put in place. We thought about data and data pipelining that needs to be in place to take advantage of that. We thought about, as our customers implement it and we do, what implication does it have for people and the skilling needs? What governance do we need to set up? So there's a lot of different elements that we've thought through, and being a customer zero and taking that mindset, hugely important.
Is there, was there ever a moment, an event that caused you to rethink the strategy that you were executing, or maybe question assumptions that you had gone in with? Like, how frequently are you pivoting or adjusting as you learn more through experimentation?
Look, we have this culture of curiosity and ongoing innovation, and focused on that. Largely driven by Michael, who founded the company 40 years ago, and Jeff Clark, who's been in the company for 37 years. So we are continually evaluating. But I'll tell you, I think as we looked at the pace at which this is coming about, that has caused us to think quite purposely about the pace at which we need to go about implementing things, and what is the systematic way of implementing Gen AI across our businesses. So, for example, back in October, we went out to the street and at our security analyst meeting and talked about the big trends. At that time, the AI hardware and services market was estimated to be $124 billion by 2027. Last year, 10 trillion tokens per generated. They were expected to go to about a quadrillion by 2028. 3 months later, the numbers had moved. The expected market was $154 billion, 1.5 quadrillion from a quadrillion. So we began to realize this is moving at a very, very dramatic pace. So we need to think about increasing the nimbleness with which we attack this and go at it. So that was one big thing. Number two, we began to realize that a lot of customers were coming to us and asking about where do they get started? How should they start? So that caused us to rethink about our portfolio. For example, in our services portfolio, that caused us to accentuate the offerings related to day zero, day one, and day two. So day zero, we work with customers to define which particular use cases they should prioritize. We went through a very systematic process. We had 800 different use cases underway in the company. We got very thoughtful about how do we prioritize and implement them. So we're bringing that learning from a customer zero mindset to our customers on their day zero. Similarly, in day one, what do you do about the data and data pipelining, and how do you deploy it? And oh, by the way, do you deploy it into the data center, or are you better off running some of these models on PCs? Because frankly, for a lot of these models, they're perfectly good, especially in a world where 83% of the data sits outside of the cloud and 50% is generated on the edge. So those are the types of thinking that we have implemented and changed our strategy and approach around.
We talk about data governance and warehousing and deployment, but I think a huge, when I talk to chief AI officers and CAOs, a huge portion of their time and energy today is spent on enablement and skill development, even beyond the tech organization, like enterprise-wide. You mentioned Dell has more than 100,000 employees. How have you guys approached that skill development for non-technical employees and kind of deployed or build some facility in the workforce with these Gen AI technologies that many of us are toying with, whether we're allowed to today or not?
Yeah, we've taken a very purposeful and programmatic approach to it, Chris. Step one is about making sure our entire population understands the fundamentals of AI. So we have implemented 4 different modules across the whole company to make sure that everybody has versatility with what the fundamentals are. Step 2 is developing what we call 101, 201, 301 level knowledge for our employees based on the domains that they will be applying AI to. And then step 3, linked to that, is generating excitement amongst our team members. Our culture is so forward-leaning and innovative that what we found is there was a huge hunger for team members to learn about it on their own. And what we have done is we have prioritized 4 use cases. As we have demonstrated impact, we have found a way, and the team members have found a way to share it. But bottom line is we are being very thoughtful about upskilling of the talent in the organization.
I love that, the essential nature of just building an excitement and fun into the evolution and discovery process today.
Absolutely.
I see so many people going through that, including myself many times. Keeping on the practical fronts, do you have any real tangible advice for chief strategy officers, CEOs, COOs, anyone thinking about and tasked with developing a strategy for AI deployments and accelerating innovation in a way that aligns with the core business strategy and operating model that a company is already executing? What would you tell them to think about?
I think, Chris, our experience on this, and we started pretty early on this journey, is that there are a few fundamental steps. And there's almost an algorithm you could follow that takes some of the scariness out of the equation and gets to impact. Number one, be very clear about what your business strategy is and what an AI strategy is that mirrors that. Number two, pick an approach. There are some companies who follow a let 1,000 flowers bloom approach, which I don't think is the right approach. Pick an approach to prioritize the use cases where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck and accentuate your strategy. Number three, set up the right tone at the top and make sure that you have the governance model in place to actually go about and systematically implementing these approaches. Number four, make sure that you build the employee skill set and build excitement around them. And number five, have the operational rhythm and drumbeat to systematically go and implement some of these things. And no, by the way, remain nimble, because there are so many new areas that are coming up all the time and new tech tools coming in all the time that make sure you can incorporate them into your workflow and how you're going to implement Gen AI.
You just, I think, wrote a great roadmap for so many of us. The other critical stakeholder, I think, at the table increasingly are company boards and directors, right? I think a lot of directors that we're working with and board advisors as well are working through what does a director need to be thinking about today, what are the questions they need to be asking, where do they need to focus their sometimes limited attention and energy right now to get the most bang for the buck, as you mentioned. If I were a board director, what would you tell me I need to be focusing on over the next 3, 6, 9 months?
Yeah, Chris, I've been a board director across over 10 different public and private boards. And as I think about the responsibility of a board, in my view, this is a really critical area for the boards to focus on. So first, I think the boards should educate themselves on the fundamentals as well as the direction in which the technology is going. And it's moving so fast, including things like agents and multi-agent systems that are coming through, which have big implications. And number two, I think the boards should be holding the management teams accountable for sharing both the risks and the opportunities, and frankly, having their own independent perspective on those as well during this time period. Because this is moving so fast, and there are so many adjacent areas through which different risks and opportunities arise for a company, that I think it's an important topic for a board-level discussion.
I think just having the discussion.
Absolutely.
The first step that so many folks are looking for. I'm curious, we're talking a lot about deployment and scaling and accelerating innovation cycles. But do you or your team use AI or Gen AI in your own strategic planning process? Is it a brainstorm partner? How are you guys using it?
I think saying no would be a bad answer to that question. I think I would destroy my credibility instantaneously. No, all kidding aside, absolutely. So, okay, what do we do?
And an example.
Yeah.
Practical.
I'll give you an example. So we've been using Gen AI tools. Well, first, we've been using Gen AI tools to just look at the landscape. So we are monitoring changes across 15 different dimensions from a strategic planning perspective, and we're using Gen AI tools and classical AI tools to look at the landscape and figure out which are the most important signals for us to watch for so we can take it into a strategic planning process. Number two, we have actually created a daily pulse using some of these tools that we disseminate to the decision makers in the company so we can all stay on top of those. And number three, we're beginning to, my team is beginning to lead into running some of the proof of concepts using various of the new tools, including multi-agent systems, to think through how do we do strategic planning better within the company. So those are some of the ways we have incorporated it into our strategic planning process, Chris.
You mentioned as part of that using the technology to help you identify signals that might be meaningful or important to your decision-making process or kind of the strategic direction moving forward. I'm curious if, I think one of the things we're all wrestling with is just how rapid the pace of innovation in this field is, how quickly new capabilities are emerging. So thinking about those signals, what are some areas that Dell is watching closely that you think helps inform you with regards to where this technology is headed over the next year or two?
So a few things we are watching for very closely. Some of the initial deployments a lot of the initial deployments are being driven by CSPs and Tier 2 CSPs aimed at training. But as we look at the migration, by the end of the decade, 90% of the compute will be towards inferencing. And inferencing is going to be driven by enterprises, and a lot of that is going to be driven by data, as we have talked about. And since the vast majority of the data sits on premises, so how does that play out? So we've been watching, 83% of the CIOs are talking about repatriating the data to on-prem. How does that drive inferencing? We are watching very closely the number of customers who are coming back and moving from POCs to buying more of our portfolio for inferencing areas. We're watching that very closely because that's a leading indicator for how rapidly we think this is going to go. And frankly, it is accelerating quite significantly.
I want to go to one of these questions from the audience. You know, we've been talking about creating that flywheel of innovation, accelerating, building momentum. One of the things that can wreck or throw sand in the gears of that flywheel is failure, something not working out, an investment not materializing with ROI. You know, there's certainly the risk of failure as you approach deployment and scaling. What would you say to everyone in the room here as they continue to focus on the pilots and deployments and bringing these things to life and delivering strategic value for their firms? How should they think about failure as part of that, as part of the innovation cycle?
It's hugely important. And I think the company culture is the key part of embracing failure. We've tried things and they haven't worked, but our culture is such that rather than dwelling on the failure, we are much more focused on, okay, what did we learn from it? And therefore, what do we do differently going forward? It's easier said than done, but that's a huge important element of that. And for this kind of a technology, we're bound to have early failures, but you got to focus on learning.
Well, I wish you many more successes than failures in the future. Thank you so much for this fascinating and very practical conversation, Vivek.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you, Vivek and Chris. Of course, you know, just like many other topics, as you can imagine, AI has to be a board-level agenda as well, just by the nature of how much impact it makes in the business. So with that said, our next session is an executive interview. It's an update on U.S. AI regulations. And of course, as we know how important that is, with so much action happening across the different geographies, including the first AI bill that was passed in the European Union a few months back. And here we are with U.S. House of Representatives, the co-chair of the Congressional Artificial Intelligence Caucus, Congresswoman Anna Escher, in conversation with the Regulating AI founder and podcast host, Sanjay Puri. Please welcome me. Welcome to the stage, please.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for being with us. And as they said, you're the co-chair of the AI caucus, but also you represent Silicon Valley as part of your district, and also have been voted as one of the most influential AI people by Time Magazine. So really thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's great to be with you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Congresswoman, AI has been talked about as one of the most transformative technologies of our lifetime. But just like with every technology, it has its risks and challenges. What are some of the risks that you look at when you look at regulation? You've been involved in almost all policy discussions happening in U.S. Congress. So tell our audience of business people some of the risks that you are looking at from an AI perspective.
Well, I think that first, I look to our past and what past challenges have been to our society, to our entire country, and legislation that has become law as a result of many of the struggles in our country. And all of the ills have not necessarily been cured, but we've made progress. So what do we need to look for that will not set us back in our society? We know that inequities still remain for many people in our society, and so AI should not exacerbate those inequities in our society. So that is, I think, a broad concern on both sides of the aisle, maybe a little more on the Democratic side, but it is something that if members were not thinking of it, the work of the bipartisan AI caucus is to bring in experts that would help essentially educate members. And we've done that now for almost 2 years, and I think that it has really advanced the thinking of members and highlighted what we need to build into legislation. So we don't want any of the inequities that exist today to be exacerbated, and I think that that's one of the top concerns. But we also have very important laws that are on the books relative to financial services, to civil rights, to housing. And so we're not starting from scratch. We're not starting from scratch. And but we also need to direct the executive branch, the agencies, to be able to enforce the laws that are already on the books as it relates to AI.
So a lot of our guests here today work on innovative companies. A lot of companies in your district are innovators. How do you balance innovation versus regulation? I mean, that's the challenge that is constantly there. Innovators sometimes don't want as much regulation, and sometimes regulation is important.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Okay. And I say that because with the appropriate level of regulation, there can be stability. So people know what the rules of the road are, so to speak. So I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And I think that, if AI is a mystery to the larger population, they don't understand it. They've heard many people hear things that are menacing. We know as members of Congress that our first and top responsibility is to protect and defend. And so our national security is a very important part of this, a high level of importance to this effort as well. And I have legislation on that as well relative to our biosecurity. But we want the general population to trust. And I think that with the right type of legislation, that we can really enlarge the trust, and I think that trust helps to breed acceptance, and it also can breed more innovation. So I don't find them to be mutually exclusive.
Congresswoman, you talked about learning from the past.
Mm-hmm.
Social media is an example of learning from the past, where we have consolidation amongst a few companies that kind of run all our social media networks. There is a fear that the same thing could happen with AI, where because AI is an expensive argument, you look at some of the sponsors here, it takes a lot of compute power, a lot of training, etc. It could end up in the hands of few. Is Congress looking at monopolistic tendencies for AI?
Well, I've anticipated it. So I've been working with Stanford University's Human-Centered AI Institute, and a woman that I think is the mother of AI, Fei Li, for the last 5-6 years. And so we've developed legislation that is moving slowly, but at least it's moving, and it's called the CREATE Act. And what the CREATE Act does is to essentially democratize AI. As you said, the resources are really in the hands of the largest companies, tech companies. And I don't resent that. I mean, it's a natural occurrence almost for them. But our country is made up of many sectors. There's the medical sector, there's the academic sector, there's the nonprofit, there's certainly the private, and the public. And so AI research and the researchers need to have access to all of this and the tools. And that's what this legislation does. And I'm pleased. I'm fairly optimistic about this legislation. It is bipartisan. It is bicameral. It's moving in the House. It's moving in the Senate. Nothing moves quickly. All right? Nothing moves quickly. But the operational word here is moving. So, and it was reflected in the president's executive order that came out much earlier this year. So I'm very hopeful. And the private sector support for it, many stakeholders in the private sector. So I'm encouraged. It's a top priority for me to get this through before I leave the Congress at the end of the year.
So the CREATE AI Act would give resources, compute resources to smaller companies, entrepreneurs, etc.
Yes.
And it would do it in conjunction with what, the National Science Foundation and other organizations?
Yes.
This is for entrepreneurs here who are listening.
Yeah, well, there is a model right now that was created by my legislation that became law, working with Stanford for the actual infrastructure for this, and it's called the NAIR, NAIRR, and there is a great deal of activity that's taking place right now between different agencies in the executive branch, and the president had this in his executive order, and in 90 days there was an exhibit that the agencies, at my invitation, came to the Hill, and it was astounding to me because, there are 2 clocks on the wall. One is regular time, the other is government time. But in 90 days, what the agencies had done in cooperation with each other in terms of launching several projects. It was very exciting, and it was highly instructive to me. So we want this to take place all over the country, and so I'm quite optimistic about it.
You talked about 2 different times. So just to follow up on that, AI is moving at, there's a new announcement every day. You talk about agents, multimodal. We had some speakers here talk about the hyperscalers, all kinds of things happening. Policy moves, as you said, in government time. So how does policy kind of keep pace? You set some policy a year, 2 years down the road. The technology could be evolving in such a different manner. So how do we make sure that there is some kind of a sync here, Congresswoman?
Well, I think it's important for, it's very often said that states are the, the incubators for policy. I think that whatever we do on the regulation side, the investments so that this is broad and deep is very important. And I hope that a future Congress will not put in place that the federal government regulations are it can only be one way. You have to allow for innovation to come. It doesn't start from up here. It starts from here. It starts small and it grows. So I hope that it's not a ceiling. It should be a floor.
Most of the companies, some of the companies here are global companies, Congresswoman, who work across different geographies. As you know, the EU has just passed its EU AI Act. China is doing its own thing. UK is doing its own thing. India is doing its own thing, and we are doing our own thing. What do you see as a role for international collaboration in terms of AI regulation? So there's some kind of a harmonization. If a company is working across geographies, they probably have to hire multiple lawyers who have expertise. And now on top of that, within the US, we have several states like California, Colorado that have passed legislation. So this is for companies here who work globally. Role of international collaboration, what do you see, Congresswoman?
Well, I think it's very important for the United States to be number one. I'm not satisfied with 7th or 17th or 14th. We want to be number one, seize this. But AI doesn't recognize any borders. So, the case for working with countries around the world is absolutely essential. And when we do, and we must, we need to always advance our country's values. We're a democracy. And so those values, and there are others that share them as well, is very important. So that cooperation is very important. But we also have adversaries, and we should not ignore them. China comes to mind, right? And so even though it's somewhat of a rocky road with China right now, in the area of AI, we have to look for every opportunity to cooperate. But of course, our national security has to always come first. But it doesn't mean that we that we leave them out of the equation. We can't afford to. It would be foolish.
So have cooperation or communication with many different regions. Workforce is an area, Congresswoman, that has, there's been talk about AI impacting large numbers of our workforce, especially white-collar workers. You look at the McKinsey report, the IMF report. So on one hand, you have 30-40% of people getting impacted by that. On the other hand, there is a shortage of AI talent in this country. Does Congress have some kind of a role in this situation in terms of workforce?
It's an excellent question, and it's a question that constituents ask on a consistent basis because very typically their fears are what they speak to, and job displacement. It's menacing, but I see, with every challenge that we have, I view it through the lens of it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to go to another level. So as some jobs people will be displaced, those jobs will not be the jobs that they are today, but there's an opportunity to retrain. And in meeting with so many of the companies in my congressional district, every single job in AI does not require a PhD. There is a whole area of opportunity where our community colleges, a 2-year training course or less, where they can, people can be essentially retooled, I guess. So does the federal government have a role in this? Absolutely. And I think it's important on the funding side because as institutions have to re-gear their training, that requires some dollars. Look, many of these efforts are not new to us. We have a challenge. It is an opportunity. Where we see where new areas of employment are more than possible, they are probable and will be the case, then prepare for it. This is not a mystery to us. But we have to be very purposeful about the path and what we need to do. And this is a huge opportunity for the United States of America on the national and international stage to improve medicine, to improve life for people. This is what the American people, I think people all over the world look for. They want a better life. They want better outcomes. So I view this as an enormous opportunity, being mindful of what the challenges are, both to our national security, to society and how we function, and the fairness that we want in our society. I don't find it menacing. What I worry about is that we won't seize the opportunity. And Congress has a key role in this, and I'm pressing very hard to get some of the basics in place that are foundational to all of this. And then colleagues will take up the rest in succeeding Congresses. One of the areas that people are very, very worried about is what's real and what's fake. And that's a legitimate concern. And it's highly legitimate in a campaign season. I don't know whether Congress will step up and get something done that will apply before the November elections, but we should. I have legislation, again, in that area that would direct NIST to develop the standards. And there would then be guardrails, and I think that it's very, very important for our democracy. But whether we can get that through or not, I'm not so sure. There's not that much time before the end of the year. It's the middle of July now. Congress is out in August. We return after Labor Day. We're in session in September, out in October for the national elections, and return after the elections for the rest of November and December. And then that's it for the 118th Congress.
Well, I think that's it for us also, Congresswoman.
I think so.
Thank you so much
Did we
for such a
stay
fantastic...
within our time frame? I hope. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all my best for the betterment of our country. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
I think we...
All right, so great question. We'll look into that. I just like the time schedule, like how we kind of bundled. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. We'll definitely take into consideration speed. So, yeah. So with that, I think we're coming at an important juncture. So much of a learning, so much of to grasp, and I'm sure you all want a little bit of a coffee and a bio break, so this is the time when we go and take a little coffee break. We'll reconvene in exactly at 10:40, in 40 minutes or so, and hopefully by the time you'll really be refreshed and ready for the next sessions here. So see you all soon.
This is the face of EY.AI.